Hey, everybody. Welcome to episode 408 of the Running Rogue podcast. This is your host, Chris McClung, joined by James Dodds. We started our third section of the book last week talking about purpose. This week, we're going to continue to talk about the mental side of the sport. This chapter and this episode will be all about mental training. How do you prepare the mind? So excited about that. But first, how are you?
Doing well. It's a good week.
Good.
How are you? I'm sorry.
Surviving.
I should have
we're good. We're all
reciprocated there.
We're surviving the hot, humid weather here. But yeah, things are good. Went to a World Cup game on Saturday, which was a lot of fun. Went to Netherlands versus Sweden in Houston with the family, which was awesome. And shout out to all the World Cup festivities happening out there. It's just wall-to-wall soccer every day, which is pretty awesome for a soccer fan. I haven't watched many, other than the U.S., many full games, but when I have little windows during the day and a good game's on, then I'll just go pop it on for a little bit and then get back to work. But it's been awesome for the vibes.
It makes
summer.
Yeah, it makes for a fun time of year. And I will say, there's two things that I'm loving. One, I just love to watch Messi, and I did get to watch him second half of their most recent game. To see him score in like the 95th minute was just kind of, I jumped out of my chair, and then I had to sit with that for a moment. I'm like, hold on, man, this isn't even the Longhorns. And that's usually the only team I would actually emote for.
Right.
And so it was interesting to observe that. I just think he's a classy guy, and it's other people's language that shaped me, but just talking about how he's elevated the sport, and just like he was made for it. And so that's been super fun. And then the other piece is I'm usually not this guy. I'm usually into the sport more than the surroundings of a sport. You know, when you go to Super Bowl games, you know, some people are there for the commercials and some are for the game. I'm usually there for the game. Well, right now, seeing all these Europeans in Texas enjoying our state, it makes you like seeing like someone from Japan try our barbecue, and you know they have amazing Wagyu beef. Like they can hold their own, but just it just makes you feel like the Buc-ee's is just so random. I take Buc-ee's for granted because again, I'm just used to driving along the highway, and I'm like, sure, I'll swing in, good bathroom, good snack, move on. But oh my goodness, it's so funny to watch all that. Are you seeing any of that on Instagram? Or
people are loving the Buc-ee's barbecue. Saw some English guys trying proper ribs, you know, smoked ribs for the first time, and they were just having an out-of-body experience with it. I don't think they realized that meat could be so fall off the bone and moist. But yeah, it's been fun. And we were in Houston for the Dutch game, and they have a tradition where they do a walk to the stadium, kind of sea of orange, they call it. And so that was being queued up at Rice University, which is about 2.5 miles away from NRG, Houston, where the Texans play, where the game was. And so that was all queuing up. I went for my run at 6:30 that morning before the game, which was at noon. And then I guess that walk started at 8 or 8:30. And so when I was swinging around Rice, I saw all the people gathering in their orange to do the walk with the famous bus, the Dutch bus that they take to all their big away games. And anyway, it was just a cool scene, cool vibe, so much orange, so much energy around the whole thing, walking through miserably hot and humid Houston weather, but unfazed by it, which was cool. Anyway, the whole thing was cool. Quite the vibe. U.S. is looking good, which is always fun. So, yeah.
I still have a little bruise from the Dutch from 4 years ago when they beat us.
They took care of us in the round of 16 pretty handily, 3-1. And I would not want to play them in this tournament either. I think they're better this time around than they were even last time. And just a really organized, efficient team. Not a lot of wasted movement, but so incisive with their attack. I mean, they dismantled Sweden 5-1, and it was almost one. It was one of those where it wasn't an overly dominant performance, meaning it went both ways. Sweden had their chances, but when they got their opportunities, 7 shots on goal for the Dutch, 5 goals. They were just efficient and clean, and that was just it. There was dominant.
I know you got to be careful with generalizations, period, but I think this is a good one. And I was just going to say that sounds very Dutch.
Right.
Systematic, efficient, like we have a process and a plan. We come in, we execute, we leave. Like
That's right. Yeah. Yeah. And they had a lot of great saves from their goalkeeper, the best center back in the world in Van Dijk. So, they're not a favorite, at least a top tier favorite like France and Argentina and Spain, but they're definitely a dark horse in that second tier that could surprise some people. So it'll be fun to see. But yeah, back to running.
Yeah.
One of the things, so we'll talk about mental training today, and we've got actually a bunch of chapters on it. So we'll go into more depth on this. But one of the questions that comes up, or the concepts I think that people think about as it relates to mental training, is there's some people that would believe either implicitly or explicitly that mental training is something, or mental strength, mental fortitude is something you have or you don't have. It's a talent like aerobic capacity or VO2 max, where there's a scale and some people are born with more of it than others. And so people, I think, make similar assumptions about themselves, about the mental side of the sport and their ability to withstand the pain and suffering that comes with the race when you're on the limits and on the edge. Where do you fall in that discussion of how much of mental fortitude, mental strength is innate versus trained and built?
I kind of lean towards it's all built. And I want to be open to the idea that some of it could be innate, but I would have to be taught that. Because even if someone said, no, I mean, sometimes I just meet athletes and they've got it. I'm like, well, yeah, but we'd have to go all the way back to the crib and how they were treated as a child before their own language and perspective could even form. So I see it all through the lens of nurture. And I read a book that I would highly recommend to people who are interested in this subject, called Willpower by Professor Baumeister. He's a PhD. And I learned, what I took from that book was the inverse of the way you asked that question. I almost assumed like it was a mark on me if I didn't have the mental fortitude, and that I always needed to try harder. And I learned in that book that you should essentially treat, quote, willpower or mental fortitude just like any other muscle in the body. And he was explaining because it fatigues. Like he was explaining like, no, to all of you folks out there, which at that time I was in this bucket. I don't claim to be in that bucket right now, but at that time I was just so curious how far I could take the whole idea of if I put my mind to it, I can. And so I had to learn, like, even judges will make some of their sloppiest decisions like on a Thursday afternoon, or politicians get themselves in trouble on a Thursday or Friday evening. Like as a week goes on, stress loads throughout a day. And he was just explaining that it's a muscle and it fatigues, and that's where you mess up. So I'm coming at it from the opposite angle, but it's still answering the question of, I absolutely believe it's a nurture component and that it can be built. And if you feel like you have none of it and you just assume others do, you start with the locus of control. I'm getting into application now, but let me pause there.
No, you're fine. Application's fine. I mean, I think what you're going with that, which is where I was going to go next, is that regardless of how you think that question's answered, and there were probably, even within science, there's probably people on slightly different parts of the spectrum, nature versus nurture, on mental fortitude. Regardless of where you are, from my perspective, you have to assume, because we know you can build it, that you can be as strong as you want to be from a mental perspective. And in order to be as strong as you want to be, you have to work on it. So it's not helpful to you as a human to say, well, it's all just innate, I can't work on it, because then you're going to just stay stagnant and you're not going to be able to develop it. And regardless of where you fall on that spectrum, it doesn't really matter. The point is, you can build it, you can work on it. Assume you can go to 100 by spending time and working on it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think part of this for some people is changing the narrative in their heads. You know, we talk about the stories that you tell yourself, and when I think about the stories you tell yourself, for me, it starts when we're kids. You know, people in school say, well, I'm just not good at math, or I'm just not good at English, or I'm just not good at insert subject.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so we start to create these stories about ourselves for whatever reason. And to me, that's one of the clearest, earliest examples you often hear is like, well, I'm just not good at math. Are you not good at math? Or is that a story in your head that you can actually change the narrative on if you work on math?
Mm-hmm.
And so I think mental training is similar in that there are people that have that story in their head. Well, I'm just not as mentally strong as that person over there.
Mm-hmm.
Or I struggle when it gets hard, and that's just innate in me. And what we're going to say in this episode and give you the practical application towards is that is a story in your head. Change the narrative.
Mm-hmm.
The narrative should be more, I can be as strong as I want to be mentally, and I have to work on it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not going to come easy. It's going to take time and application, and we'll dig into over the next several episodes what that application looks like. And by the way, it starts with a statement of purpose from last week's episode. Then you can be mentally strong. You can be resilient in races. You can be the one that stays on it when the going gets tough at the end of a half marathon or a full marathon. So you got to change the narrative.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would even go as far, because you brought up that idea of like, we might see someone and say, I don't have the mental fortitude or mental resilience that they have. I think that's the point where you need to stop, pause, and of course do what you said, accept that you can grow it, start where you are and grow it. And also be careful drawing an assumption about that other person. Like it should become a question. How did they become so mentally resilient? Because it may be true in that moment, in that static moment, they may have more than you. That'd be like walking into the weight room on day one and seeing someone with a huge bicep and thinking, does that person have a bigger bicep than me or not? It's like, fine, yeah, they have a bigger bicep. Now go ask them, how'd you get that big bicep? You could do that mentally. How'd you get there? Like turn it into a question as opposed to a static, defined, like limited state of being.
Yep. And I think for some of us, the building part of the equation naturally starts earlier in life for whatever reason. Those that I work with that were involved in sports as a kid, for example, they're, without really thinking about it, they're building that mental resilience playing sports as a kid, overcoming bad games, bad losses, mistakes, seeing others on their team do the same and learning from that, and then developing those reps, so to speak, in a sporting context. And so when they go to a running context, they've already built some of those things without really thinking about it.
Mm-hmm.
And then they naturally at that point in their journey have more mental fortitude, so to speak, than somebody who might not have had that experience, who comes into running later in life, who maybe hasn't thought of themselves as an athlete before. And, you know, I'll get from those people, sometimes I'll get the question of, well, how should it feel? How much should it hurt? How can I push through the hurt? And they have to then go through those reps to figure it out.
Mm-hmm.
So again, it's all about where are you on that spectrum, assuming I can get to 100, and ask yourself, how do I do that? The other thing that pops up in these discussions before we kind of get into some of the practical stuff is, and we cover this more in the book than we'll do today, is some of the mental models around limitations. There are theories like the central governor theory that tell you, well, your brain's going to shut you down before you get too far in the pain cave as a defense mechanism, and there's nothing you can do to control that at some point.
Mm-hmm.
The nervous system's going to shut you down, and that is one theory. There are many, and there are others that dispute some of those concepts that Tim Noakes introduced with the central governor theory. We cover some of them in the book. But I think what everybody agrees with in those various models about how the brain interacts with the physical body to keep you safe, I think what everybody generally agrees with is that the mind or the nervous system or the wiring in you is going to try to shut you down
Mm-hmm.
as protection mechanism before you come anywhere near your limits. And so when you're getting those signals of pain or suffering, then usually they're kicking in well before your actual limits. And so one of the things we develop in this process of developing the mental fortitude is learning to quiet those signals and kind of push beyond. And so I think that is, if we're stepping into this and kind of accepting a couple of assumptions that you need to accept in order to really grow in this space. One is that you can build it, you can grow it as strongly as you want to if you're willing to do the work. And the other is that the mind's going to try to limit us well before our actual limits. And so therefore we can, without fear, step into the curiosity of this mental space and gymnastics, because there's more to find out. There's deeper to go, usually, in every case.
Yeah. And the only thought that came to me there was simply that, yes, they're in there too for safety, but they also, I think it's a good reminder to let everyone know that the body always seeks homeostasis. So it's always seeking that peaceful, calm middle, like just to keep you in that harmonious little homeostasis. And that's when that existential perspective, like us talking about a big why and what do you want and what are you going to go for last week, was important, because it's like the body does want to remain as is. It wants to just seek that perfect little balanced state. And then the invitation, and that's the key word, the invitation of life always is, well, what do you want? Like, because if you want to go climb a mountain, you can. If you want to go run a marathon, you can. I mean, this is freaking why I love the sport in the first place, is that invitation to be like, I wasn't sure that I could, but I trust that my body's adaptive and malleable, and that if I do it properly, because you can burn out the brain just like you can burn out a muscle, like it's got to be an incremental gain as well. But I don't know, I'm just trying to bolster that belief.
Yep. And so what we're going to talk about today is sort of mental training 101, so to speak. How do we build it? How do we apply it? How do we learn from it? And again, we'll drill into some of this stuff more as we go and get to other topics in the mental spaces through the next few episodes. But we've got 5 things that we want to talk about today. Building your mental training, your mental resilience, so that you can be as strong as that person you admire in this space. The first one is very, very practical, which is to say, have a plan, know your plan. And so I think part of the challenge with the idea of the mental side of the sport is that we get in our feels, we start to have anxiety, fears, things that pop in when we start thinking about the edges. What's going to happen when things get hard? How am I going to respond? And so we start to get kind of in our head, so to speak, and in the emotional side of the mental space. But one way out of that, one way to disconnect a little bit from it, is to just be very, very rote. Have a plan, execute your plan. And so talking about this in a race context, you're going to have a race, you're going to develop a plan for that race, and then you're just going to go execute it mile by mile. And that plan, by the way, is going to include elements of pacing. It's going to include elements of nutrition and hydration planning and execution. And it's going to include mental prep, mental tools that are going to go with that plan. And so to me, one of the ways to be mentally strong is to try to, through execution and planning, disconnect from the emotional side. Those things are going to come. Those are normal. You can acknowledge them without judgment. But then you set them aside and you say, okay, well, what can I do to prepare? And that's by writing out the battle plan, so to speak. And so that's really the first step, is being able to have a good plan and then go execute that plan.
Yeah. I don't have a lot to add on there, so I'll just make a mention of, I've been encouraged by a one-liner, and that's a bad plan's better than no plan, because, you know, I'm trying to speak to maybe someone new informing this. It's like, even if you are new to shaping a plan and not sure if it's perfect or whatever, just in the act of creating one, you're shaping your mind towards a direction, A. And B, the reason why a bad plan is better than no plan is because you now know what to iterate upon. You're very clear about like, oh, okay, well, like I know exactly why it was bad, and therefore the answer to improve it becomes a lot more sharp and clear. And all of that's problem solving and mental work. Like that's quote, just the act of doing it is engaging the mind and learning how to say like, I've got an idea of how this should go. It didn't go like that at all. I was way off, but now I know how to, now you have a plumb line to measure against and improve it.
Yep. Yeah. Cause it also helps you limit the variability. You know, we talk about controlling the controllables, and that's what having a plan does. It helps you control the controllables. So you're not stepping into a space where it gets hard in a half marathon at mile 3 because you're building into the race, you're settling into a planned half marathon pace. So that by mile 10, yeah, maybe you're on the limit a little bit and on the edge, but you have a plan to hopefully pick it up at that point. But you've taken away that variability versus somebody who goes out without a plan, cranks it in those first 3 miles, finds themselves suddenly on the limit at mile 4. That's going to be a very different mental fortitude required to hang through the rest of the 9 miles than if you're more measured. So the planning just helps you control the controllables, limit the variability, and then mentally compartmentalize the battles a little bit. Because yes, things will pop up that you're not familiar with. But one of the things I always go back to when people start to worry about mile 10 of a half or mile 21 of a marathon is I tell them not to worry about it. Stay present. You know, you can run 1 mile at your target first mile pace. That's all you have to know you can do. Execute that. You know, you can run the next mile at the next planned pace. So you're by controlling the controllables, you're also confining and putting boundaries around the unknowns so that when you do get to those edges, when you do get to the unknowns, they're compartmentalized, so to speak. And then through some of the other things we'll talk about, you'll be ready to deal with them at that time. But if you bring it in and you open yourself up to those things too early, no one has the mental fortitude to be on the absolute limit for 13 miles or 26.2 miles. That's not how those races are organized and constructed, right? And so having a plan, you limit and manage and put boundaries around the uncertainty a little bit.
And I know we're going to get into some specifics of developing all that, so I'll save some of that and just say here that I remember at some point flipping and realizing even the gel strategy on race day, I started looking at it through the lens of the mental component, because I was like, hey, no matter what happens on the execution of this race, and if I get the goal I want or not, I know that at 60 minutes, I'm taking that gel and every 30 minutes after. And those were, that was like the first the controllable type, like low hanging fruit, easy, just like that alone is a marker on like, well, at least that's not an unknown. Like this is not a completely unmapped endeavor where it's like a blank canvas. It's like, I'm like, I at least have those markers that I know I will do that no matter what, because that's the easiest controllable.
Yep. And with fueling in particular, you know, if you start at 60 and then come back every 30 minutes, especially if you've executed that in training, then you're going to be good from a fueling standpoint, from a sugar availability standpoint. If you skip a gel, or if you don't have a plan and you're kind of winging it as you go and taking them when you feel like you need it, then you're going to open yourself up to bonking type responses, and you can't be mentally strong enough to withstand a energy drop like a bonk. So we're, again, putting boundaries around the mental challenges we'll face by executing a well-managed pacing strategy, nutrition, hydration strategy, supplemented and supported by the mental tools for when you need them, which that's the second point. So first point is know your plan. If you don't have a plan, then none of this other stuff matters. Second point, bring your tools, bring your weapons from a mental standpoint to bear. I think of it like arrows in a quiver in a sense, or tools in a toolkit. You want to make sure you're packing those things to come with you on race day. And everybody's list of tools is going to look a little bit different, perhaps. There's certain people that like certain tips or tricks that I provide, and others that like others. But we'll talk about some examples now. All of these things work. You have to test them and try them for yourself, and then see what you want to bring in your toolkit to race day. Talk about some examples now. And again, some of these we're going to drill into more in later chapters. First one, and one that I think is, I'm actually going to order these slightly differently. First one that I think is really important pre-race is visualization. You want to visualize your race, start to finish, start line to finish line before the race in full. You don't have to do it all at once. I like to chunk it up on easy runs in those final weeks, but take myself through the race in my mind's eye, going through all the challenges, executing the plan that I've laid out, applying the mental tools that we'll talk about here, because science tells us, and this is to me is fascinating, that if you visualize something, then the nervous system has a response as if you're doing it physically. So while you may never have run a race in a certain time, visualize doing it gives you some of the similar neurological responses as if you were actually doing it. So when you do it, you're more prepared. The nervous system is more prepared. And again, I don't know how that works or what the magic is there, but it's a real thing that science supports, and it's used in all sports, even at the highest level. I remember Aaron Rodgers talking about a throw that he made against the Cowboys many, many years ago to dash our hopes in a playoff game in AT&T Stadium in Dallas. And somebody asked him in the press conference afterwards, because he made an insane throw to get them into field position to kick the winning field goal at the end. And they asked him, have you ever made that throw before? Because he was moving to his left, throwing across his body, receivers coming out of nowhere to catch it, hits him right on the sideline, tippy toe style and all of that. And he said, I don't think I've made that throw, but I've done it in my head. And he is, has been a big proponent of visualization in his sport. Same applies here. So visualize your race, start to finish. And that means going through a mental, but also I think about it in the full senses experience, where you're taking yourself through the race in small chunks and visualizing what it would look like, the start line, getting into that chaos and navigating it, dropping your gear off, doing whatever you need to do to get lined up, centering yourself in that moment to try to keep your breath and your heart rate under control before the race starts. Gun goes off, all the chaos of people passing you and going crazy at the beginning, as often happens, with you trying to settle into your pace and make sure that it's not too fast in those opening miles, to executing each mile, to thinking about the landmarks and the milestones that you'll see along the course, to the various hills and the terrain that you're going to navigate, to finding moments where it gets hard and dealing with it, to using the self-talk that we'll talk about here in a second to make sure you're staying in rhythm, to the end when it gets hard, pushing through all the way to that finish line with the goal time on the clock. That is a very short synopsis of what it should look like, but it's more critical than you might think.
I think it helps you go in with like a level of I think the way to respond to that is like, for anybody that may have a little bit of resistance to that idea, I think like this concept of manifestation or visualization, to those who see it as like a little out there, I think it's because when people talk about that in isolation as like it's its only thing, like all you have to do in life is quote, visualize and manifest, and it just happens. So then you have a whole another camp of people that are like, shut up, nobody cares, just do it. Like, just that all action, no thought. And then you have all thought, no action. And I just want to give the reminder of the holistic approach that's embedded in the way that we go about coaching, even though we're breaking this apart as one concept and talking about it now. It's like what you're doing when you visualize like that. We're not promoting some kind of like out there concept. It's just like you're aligning your mind towards a single purpose. And when you do that, your body starts to fall in line with that. And so yes, the action component is just as important. But I like to think of it, because you presented this earlier, like when people have those nerves or butterflies and before a race or whatever, how do you get mentally strong in order to handle that? It's like what you're at the very least doing, again, invert it and think about it this way, you're demystifying the event. So instead of it being this like grand, mystical, like I have no idea what I would do, again, we locked away the gel strategy as a simple low-hanging fruit. And now like what you just did, you were like, you're creating a sense of familiarity in your mind where you're like, I see the starting corral. I see myself coming over the line. Like those are no longer these like foreign, unknown, like that's how fear grows. Like the greater the entropy, the greater like variability in the mind, that's what creates anxiety. But when you limit it and you start demystifying it, making it something like, it's not going to be fully predictable, but you're making it less vague, you're creating a strength in the mind where it calms down and it relaxes and it starts to feel comfortable, because it at the least can say, I know which direction is north. I know where I'm going and what I'm going to do. So if anything does go wrong, I know how to realign, because I already have that in my head. I've seen myself deal with problems and how I would respond to this. So you're demystifying it at the very least.
Yeah, and it's not going to happen exactly the way you visualize, but it doesn't need to.
Mm-hmm.
Then that through that visualization process, then you're ready to not only deal with the things that do happen as planned, but also the things that happen as unplanned. Because again, it's sort of like we just talked about, you're narrowing the boundaries of chaos, of potential chaos, because you've identified all the things that you're going to face that you can understand and work through in your mind, so that creates space for you to deal with the new things when they come and not be overwhelmed.
Mm-hmm.
So visualization, if you're not doing it, highly recommend. I always start this process 4 to 6 weeks. So 4 to 6 weeks out from race day. Everybody might have a little bit of a different approach to it, but my approach is just starting in that window. I start to just take chunks of the race and visualize it in my head on an easy run, recovery run, and just kind of work through it that way. Sometimes I come back to sections of the race that I might have struggled with mentally, and I'll do it over 6 to 8 runs in those final weeks. Think through the whole race, start to finish. So visualization, critical pre-race. The second thing I want to talk about is positive self-talk. It sounds silly, and this can come in many forms, but science also tells us that it works. And for us, from a race execution standpoint, this manifests typically in the form of mantras, things that you can use to settle the mind and settle the body in sequence or in synchronization with that, so that you can deal with whatever you might be facing. Science also tells us that neutral mantras work, but we tend to like to categorize them in a way that makes sense. So for example, for us, we talk about rhythm mantras and fight mantras as two types of mantras you might have for race day. Rhythm mantras being for those early and middle miles where it's all about finding a groove, finding a rhythm, being meditative on the run, so to speak. And then fight mantras for the end, when it's going to get hard in the last 3 of a half or the last 6 of a marathon. What are you going to do to go to battle, to fight, to push through those hard moments? And those are two very different types of mantras. One of them is trying to mellow you out. The other one's trying to bring you up, so to speak. So those are 2 examples that we talk about in the self-talk category, but you want to make sure you're preparing those things, putting them in your mind, ideally also practicing them in some of your final workouts so that you can try them on for size. So self-talk, a critical part of the equation as well.
Yeah. And the only thing I would add there, again, I guess I have this instinct to cover rebuttals today, and I don't know why, but I'm following the thread. So something we're not saying there is, that one got bastardized too, I think. And some people can see self-talk as like a fluffy thing, because if you're thinking of like the cliche, because you're thinking of an Instagram clip where you're like, I'm good enough, I'm smart enough, and gosh darn it, people like me. It's like, we're not promoting that. And we're also not promoting lying to yourself. Like if you're having a hard time, we're not saying like, pretend like everything's okay. It's more of like, hey, think about the thoughts in your head that you choose to attach to and perseverate on, or the actual words that you say, because those things do matter. And at the very least, don't say, Bruce Lee says this. I've heard psychologists say this. Like there's so many people that say this. Don't say things that make you feel weak. There's a difference between owning your shortcomings and saying like, yeah, I want to be better at X and I want to grow, or yes, I would like to be faster than I am today. But there's a very big difference between saying something like that and meditating on that thought, as opposed to, I'm slow, no good, I always blow up in my races. Like you got to be careful about the statements you make about yourself, because our brains, this is hard for people, I think, to accept. They'll hear it, they'll understand it, and they may not even catch the gravity of it. But our brains are actually information receiving machines. We don't generate information. We receive information and make sense of it and then use it. And so you got to be real careful about the things that you're hardwiring up there in your mind, because if you become that athlete, and a lot of athletes struggle with this, like if you're constantly putting yourself down, self-talk fits in that bucket. Like stay away from narratives that make you feel weak. You are not doing any good by putting yourself down. I had this conversation with an athlete last night, actually. I was like, it took me a long time in life to understand this, but the idea of self-loathing or self-hatred or beating yourself up, it's the same thing as self-absorption. They both start with self. And so it's like, be careful about the trains of thought that you're going to run down, attach to, or constantly repeat to yourself, because that can destroy you as an athlete. And I'd go as far as saying that can destroy you as a person.
Agree with that completely. That's when we also get into another category of self-talk, which is affirmations, positive affirmations. How do you reprogram the brain to believe the positive things about yourself versus the thing that the devil on your shoulder always tells you? And one of the ways is actually writing out affirmations that you say to yourself in the mirror, or that you repeat to yourself on a run, and maybe even have others tell you to help reinforce it, because you have to reprogram the mind to think positive thoughts versus to always go to the self-deprecation ones. So yes, that's another good example, because you're right. We are what we think we are. And some people, the default is a negative. And so you have to, not to say that there's anything wrong with that. Again, we always want to process these things without judgment, but then you got to do the work to change the narrative, to change the talk. And, going back to what we were talking about earlier, some people say, well, I'm not good at mental fortitude, or I'm not as good as that person. If that's what you believe and you tell yourself, then it will be true. So something you may need to work on is creating those affirmations and say, no, I am strong. I can be resilient, whatever it may be, so that you can then program the brain to think the opposite. So a good example there. There are other examples in terms of mental tools and weapons. I'm not going to go into all of them. I love, just to quickly name off some examples, these are all covered in the book. The idea of going fishing late in a race, using the race around you to find motivation, because when you're focused on somebody else and catching them, it takes your mind off of the pain. I love counting as a tool. It's kind of a neutral mantra, especially late in the race where you're counting to 30 or 60, because you can do anything for 30 or 60 seconds and just push through, and then you restart the count when you get to that milestone, whatever's in your head. That's a way to disconnect from the pain and focus on something else. I love landmarks as a tool, especially late in the race. When I'm trying to think about how I might finish or kick, I'm always studying the landmarks. In Houston at the marathon where I have my PR, once you get back into downtown there over the final mile, you go through downtown and you cross 10 intersections before you get to that very final finishing chute. And so when I got there, when I PR'd last, it was 10, 9, 8, each intersection marked by a countdown in my head that was telling me to unleash just gradually the beast as I could at the finish of that race. So landmarks can be a great tool, and pairing them with your strategy is another weapon to potentially bring. But we have others that we talk about in the book. But bring your weapons, bring your tools, find the ones that work for you and carry them with you. Maybe not all of them that we've talked about or are your favorites, but you will find them. Pack your toolkit, bring all the arrows in your quiver so that you're ready to roll on race day. So that's number 2, bring your weapons to the race, bring your tools. Third, build the mentality of someone that is mentally strong. And this one's a little bit more amorphous, and, we can take it a few different ways, but I think it starts with believing you can, and then executing the things that we've just talked about, having a plan, bringing your tools. But there is a mindset that comes with all of this that is kind of the opposite of what you were talking about earlier, the I can. It's the I can mindset that becomes so important. And one of the things I talk about in this space is, how do you know you gave your all? What does it look like to give your all? And that's a physical thing. That's a mental thing. But what does it look like? And it's this mentality of never quit. We can go through a lot of cliches here. Never quit. Give everything you have. Empty the tank. All those things. But that is basically a mindset that you approach with. Say, look, no matter what happens, I'm going to keep pressing. And it's something that requires practice, and it's not a trivial thing to talk about, and it's more amorphous, but it is part of this equation as well. That never quit mindset, that give your all mentality, that's going to make sure that regardless of what happens on the course, you're doing that.
My only response there is like, yeah, I do this with athletes, and I always did it with myself when I knew I was going after something special. And that was, I start with sort of like the baseline, and that's, I prepare myself well, because it's a way of just locking in no matter what. That idea of I can, it's also like I will. And I just tell myself, worst case scenario, it's like if I fall off pace, I'll hold what I can. If what I was holding drifts into a jog, I'll keep jogging. If I'm jogging and that's drifting and it turns into a walk, I will keep walking. And if my walk becomes a crawl, I will never stop crawling. Now, do I actually, that has never happened to me, not the crawl part in a race. Everything else has up until that point. But I think it's just a way of like locking in the brain of like, I like that you said I can, and I just wanted to tuck in I will. Like when you, it's sort of like burning the bridges and saying like, okay, no matter how bad this goes, forward momentum, there is no negotiation when it comes to that. Like I must go forward.
Yeah. And one of the things I think that is a misconception about this idea is that it has to look superhero-like or look even perfect, meaning every single moment I'm on it. I'm never relenting, ever. No second in the race do I ever doubt. I'm always there. And that's not what this looks like. It is not heroic necessarily. It is not superhero-like action or behavior. It is more just that when you do have those moments of doubt, or those moments where the body's like exhaling and letting you back off, you respond to it. So it isn't perfection. It isn't from mile 1 to mile 13.1, always pushing to the very limit. It's more that when those curveballs come, when the doubts pop in, when the mind shuts you down for a little bit because you feel like you can't go anymore, that you come back from it, that you always respond. You say, no, I'm going to fight through that. And so that's a little bit different than I think sometimes people think about this idea. It's not perfect. It can be messy. It can be sometimes ugly, but it's just always bouncing back in whatever form you can. I always talk about my race in Boston in 2016 when I got a stress fracture in the race, had to walk the last 5 miles of the Boston Marathon. And that was all I had. You talk about walking, that's what I could do physically. I didn't feel like I could run because I felt like I was going to break something or tear something. I didn't know what was wrong at the time, just that my heel really hurt. And what could I do? I could walk. And so I walked the last 5 miles of the Boston Marathon and finished in a personal worst time still to this day. But it's one of my proudest races because I gave all I had, and that's just what it happened to look like.
Mm-hmm.
So this doesn't necessarily look amazing or heroic every time. It's just that mentality of you're always going to bounce back. You're always going to respond to the doubts and to the questions when they come.
Mm-hmm. And I think people who make that practice on the bad ones, because it's the same mental muscle you're using, when you are in a good race, that same mental muscle is going to be there for you to grab the 10 seconds every mile as you close. Like, that's what we hope and wish for everyone. But you got to be bought in. Like, if I'm dying, I never stop moving forward. And if I'm winning, I never let off the gas. It's actually the same mental muscle, just manifested in two different ways based on what kind of day you were having on race day.
Yeah, Des talks about this idea of who are you when you're at your worst, or who are you when things go wrong? And because that's where the real magic is. And that's kind of the idea that we're talking about here is who are you when things go wrong? And how do you respond to that? And so, but building that mentality requires practice. And I think it also helps to have people to model. And so the final two things we'll talk about today, one is you got to execute, apply, and learn, because nobody goes from 0 to 100 in one race. And then the last one we'll talk about, and we'll get to these each in turn here, is you got to do it with a team, ideally, who can help show you the way. So the first, execute, apply, and learn. This is just a matter of repetition, you know, and some people have had the opportunity for more repetition than others. And you're going to step into a race and you're going to have things go wrong, and you're going to put all this, the plan to work, the tools to work, and you're going to see how it goes. And then you're going to be able to step back from that, feel the feels, and say, all right, what did I learn? What did I do that I liked? What did I do that I didn't like? How can I do it better next time? And there's no end result on this journey. There's always just a little bit better. And I think we're all on that path to be just a little bit better, but you got to practice it.
I will just add a tidbit of science that I think is so fun. I've learned it in the last couple of years, and Huberman's talking about it a lot. And so nothing new that I'll say. I'm quoting him word for word, but when I heard you say, like, you got to practice it and build it and treat it, this is just further, like, to help people trust that it's worth the effort. And I mean, just like, you know, you could be thinking about this from day one of training. Like, hey, I'm choosing to do these little things, and I'm building it every time I choose to go for a run, or every time I get into the workout, even though that day I wasn't necessarily like wanting to, but I know that dream I have that's 4.5 months away, I'm going to choose it now, that early on. Is Huberman talks so much about, we all know the prefrontal cortex. I want this to become, like, I feel like that's household terminology, prefrontal cortex, like our ability to forecast and plan and determine risk, etc. Well, there's another part of the brain called the anterior mid-cingulate cortex, the AMCC. And I wish people would just Google this and get familiar with it so they don't think it's like us pushing do the mental side. It's every time you do something you don't want to do, but you know you should, that it's good for you, that area of the brain lights up and it grows. And every time you resist doing something you know you shouldn't, and that's the key, is that you want to, but you know it's not helpful in alignment with your race, so you choose not to do it, that area of the brain lights up and it grows. And this thing can continually grow. And that's actually his scientific, like, that's his explanation as a neuroscientist as to why David Goggins became who David Goggins is. He was a guy that stumbled into it experientially and said, I will just constantly choose to do the hard thing, etc. And now he's known as like the hardest man on the planet or whatever. And I'm not trying to make people David Goggins. I'm just using that as an outlier to point us in that direction, to kind of set the stake over here so that we pull people from the middle a little closer. And it's like, remember, like, every little choice that you do in your practice of training, and every time you choose training and doing what you need to do, or taking the the electrolytes and like going to the 8 o'clock bedtime before your long run. All of those are micro decisions that are feeding. When you say that practice of like, keep feeding it and doing it little by little. And it's like, you're turning on an area of the brain that Huberman is now saying, a lot of scientists are looking at it and saying this is associated with the will to live. Like, it is so important for sports and performance, and it is so much more important than even sports and performance.
Yeah, and I love that you extended it beyond just the hard thing itself. You know, we're talking about this in the context of a race, and yeah, you need to race to learn how to execute in a race, but also you're building it all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Every little decision, every time you push through in a workout, every time you decide to pull back and manage it perhaps differently if you're not feeling it, all of those little decisions that you're making create this familiarity with dealing with challenge and struggle that then makes it more normal, more rote. Mm-hmm. So when you do have the hard thing pop up that you didn't know was coming, you know how to respond to it. And again, I think we're all on a journey that's never ending here. I mean, I've been racing for 26 years. I've done over 130 races. Am I there in terms of being as mentally strong as I could possibly be? No. And also, by the way, I'm faced with new challenges today, which is fun and exciting too, which then you can pursue with curiosity and say, well, I know what it looks like to race hard in a marathon. What does it look like to race hard over a 3-day stage race when you're trying to manage your energy a little bit differently and save something for that final day? So you're always learning, and that's the cool part of it. But you want to just keep pushing into that learning process and recognize that you don't have to be all the way there today. Mm-hmm. The last point that we'll talk about is we really, really believe this. This is a training principle core to us, but I think it really applies in the mental side is if you're doing it with a team, there's so much richness in what you can learn from others from this perspective. I think for us, it's easiest to see it in the context of our virtual groups because they're all communing in a forum where they're talking about these things. It's obviously happening in our in-person groups as well. But when you see people talk about, I use this mantra and here's how it worked for me, or they go do a hard race and you think, man, if that person can do it, I can do it too. Then it just builds this confidence and it also helps you pull from the experience of others so that you can learn faster. Mm-hmm. And so if you're not somehow tapping into a group, it doesn't necessarily have to be a group training concept. It could just be some friends that you like to share experiences with that also run. Then if you're not doing that, then you're not really flexing the muscle as strong as you can.
Mm-hmm. And we've emphasized the importance of a team from the physiological side before, but I'm actually going to tee you up on this one and give it back to you because it's one of my favorite stories to tell, and I tell it in my own way, but I want to hear the accurate version here. But it involves you, and if I understand it correctly, another coach of ours who's a badass, 4 times Olympic trials qualifier, Allison Maxis. I believe that's where you developed the one-liner, "Why not me?" And if I'm correct, you could tell the story now.
Yeah, I mean, I trained with Allison, did a lot of miles together when she was qualifying for Olympic trials, and we would often be step by step in workouts, and she was getting results that I was dreaming about. And you see that in training, you think, well, I can do the workout she does. I can hang with her in these moments. And certainly many times she kicked my ass. Allison knows that too. Mm-hmm. But then she would go do these big and amazing things that were so inspiring to me. And it eventually, or in the beginning, I would think, well, I can't do that the way she does. That's a different level. But eventually it transitioned to say, no, if she can do that, well, why can't I do that? Enough times of being stride for stride in workouts, it changed the narrative in my head. And, that happened probably around 2014 or so, if I'm thinking back about 12 years ago, where I just kind of unlocked a new belief in myself simply by being shoulder to shoulder with somebody who was also doing similar things that I wanted in workouts. And by the way, sharing similar insecurities and fears and doubts, just like I had. And so, yeah, it became the mantra out of it became, well, if she can, why not me? Shortened to why not me? So yeah, shout out to Allison Max is still co-coaches with me in our virtual community. She's awesome. Competing in different ways these days, but still a badass in all respects.
Mm-hmm. I just like that story because I think, like, I'm going to speak about you abstractly. It's like you represent someone who's not walking around like Eeyore and sad and down on yourself. Like, you were showing up 5:30 a.m. workouts Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday. You're crushing mileage. You're putting up numbers that a lot of people not just admire, but I would dare say some would even envy, you know, wanting to run your times. And it's like, that's a clear example of just like, even you, like, you know, someone who's pursuing his best and aiming at his highest aim still needed to take inspiration from teammates and develop a mantra from that experience. And it just fits that do it with a team recommendation so perfectly, you know?
Yeah. And I think after that mental shift, if I'm remembering right, I think I PR'd in every distance except the 5K over the 18 months after that. That just shift, like, oh, wait. Because I had kind of in my head accepted this idea that maybe I wouldn't get any faster at that point in my life and career in the mid 30s, you know, so old. But I did. Mm-hmm. And anyway, that was part of it, was just that simple mental shift brought on by watching someone else do it.
Mm-hmm.
And in this way, I also like the idea of people thinking about inspiring others. You know, when we talk about people going into races, sometimes we lean on that idea of remember who's watching you, not to create pressure, but rather to be a source of inspiration so that then they go and do the race the next weekend or 2 weekends later and can say, hey, I saw you do this, I'm going to go do it too. And then it becomes this way where you're all kind of striving together. Again, not with pressure on the line, but more of opportunity. It's like, mm-hmm. I have the opportunity to inspire someone. And in some ways, I also like to think of it as an obligation to each other that manifests when you're going from week to week on races, but also even within the same race. You know, we talk about when we do our destination races is that whether you're right next to somebody or not, you're all in it together on race day. And if you can think about, well, that person might be a little bit behind me or a little bit ahead of me, but they're going through the same struggles and challenges, and I'm going to push through too, so that when we get to the finish line, we can share those stories of, hey, yeah, I wanted to quit, but I didn't because you were ahead of me or you were behind me, and I knew that I had to for the group. And it's real, it's palpable, and whatever format that can manifest for you, whether it be in just friends or family members that are racing or training groups or run clubs that you are inspired by, it's just, there's so much richness in what you can learn from others.
Mm-hmm. It reminded me of a story. We got to interview an athlete in Rogue Rising. She was running her first marathon because she was actually a competitive CrossFitter, someone who regularly attended like the high-level CrossFit game, like competitions, and she challenged herself to be a complete beginner with running. So in her experience, having been so high level in one category and now so brand new and kind of being recreated in this new category, of course, like, again, being so competitive all of her life as an athlete, was really struggling and only seeing the people ahead of her and everything. Mm. And when she crossed the line, a woman came up to her and was just like, I was following you the whole way, and I know we never talked, but I just want you to know how much it meant to me. And for some people, they may have to have that experience like that before they let it sink in. But it's like, in her mind, she could have never fathomed that she might actually be an inspiration to someone, because she was only focused on those who are an inspiration to her, which is good. Aim up, look around, be inspired. I love that. And like you said, be cognizant of the fact that you said of who's watching you. And I'd even say that you're being watched, you know, not in a scary way, but in like a, hey, like, you don't know like what someone else is going through, and therefore who might be taking inspiration from you. Yep.
It reminds me of the thing I say, which is that running is only a solo sport if you want it to be, even though we're often on individual pursuits in these races. So lean into it. It matters. Going back, 5 things we talk about: know your plan and have it. Otherwise, none of this other stuff matters. Bring your tools and weapons, your mental tools and weapons to race day. Build that mentality and resilience through practice, execute, apply, learn. And And then finally, do it with a group, do it with a team so that you can inspire and be inspired by others. So we can wrap this one here. One quick note and announcement for next week is I'll be on vacation, so we will not have an episode coming out a week from this Friday. So taking 1 week hiatus, and then we'll be back on the other side. Also, as a reminder, still not too late to join us for fall training. We've got virtual groups. We've got groups in the Austin area and Dallas areas. Check all of that out at roguerunning.com. Or if you need more guidance, email coaching@roguerunning.com. And finally, you can always catch us on Friday on Instagram Live, 2 p.m. Central, if you have questions about this or if you have questions about your own training. So we'll wrap it here. Go get your mental work done, and we'll talk to you next week.